Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Li Jianhua. Our top stories. China hits back at the EU's tariffs on electric vehicles and considers taking its case to the World Trade Organization.
On other headlines, steady as she goes. The United States Federal Reserve leaves interest rates unchanged with a hint of a cut ahead.
Ukraine's president joins G7 leaders at their summit in Italy as they agree to back a $50 billion loan for Kiev using frozen Russian assets.
Police in Argentina use water cannon and tear gas to disperse demonstrators against President Milei's economic reform bill.
And on the eve of kickoff, security is beefed up for Euro 2024 across the 10 German cities hosting the football tournament.
China has hit back at the European Union's decision to raise tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, saying it may be in violation of World Trade Organization rules and could constitute protectionism.
The EU announced extra duties of up to 38%, claiming Chinese EVs are heavily subsidized. The Chinese Ministry of Commerce says the EU's decision lacks a factual and legal basis.
同时，我们敦促欧方
We urge the EU to immediately correct its erroneous actions and effectively implement the important consensus reached during the recent meeting of Chinese, French, and EU leaders. We call on the EU to adhere to the correct approach in China-EU relations, properly address trade frictions through dialogue and consultation, expand cooperation through healthy competition, and achieve mutual benefits.
Our correspondent Peter Oliver is in Berlin. Peter, good to see you. We know German cars have a huge presence in China, so tell us more about German car makers' response. We don't know if China is going to roll out tit-for-tat measures.
We don't know that yet. It is highly expected here in Germany that that is what China will do. And when you mentioned at the beginning of the programme that China's saying that this may constitute protectionism, it's out and out being called protectionism here in Germany by car makers and by politicians. We'll start off with the automakers in the VDA, the Car Industries Association here in Germany. They represent the huge names. You're talking about BMW, VW, Volkswagen and Daimler. They put out a statement saying that these tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles coming into the EU were a step away, if I quote, a step away from global cooperation. We've also heard from CEOs like of Mercedes and Porsche saying they weren't happy with them at all. Now, when you move away from the business side of it, politically here in Germany, there's almost nothing that the three-way coalition that rules the country can agree on right now. There is trouble in the camp there. But one thing they do seem to be presenting a unified front on is standing against these tariffs. We've heard from Volker Wissing, the transport minister, saying that they would ultimately come back and bite German manufacturing, German auto manufacturing being exported to China. We've also heard from Robert Habeck, who's not only the economy minister, he's not only the minister for the environment, but he's also the vice chancellor, saying that there needs to be talks between the EU and China, that this can't be the end of the discussion, that these tariffs will be put in place.
But what impact will this have on German automakers' profitability? So how is the market reacting to it?
Well, pretty much as soon as it was announced that this was going to be the case, that the European Commission would put in place these tariffs, we saw BMW's stock price tumble on in the immediate aftermath. And what we do know from the plans that are put in place from these automakers, like, just bear in mind, back in the huge Euro crisis of not so long ago, it was only selling S-Class Mercedes in China that really saved the Mercedes brand. In fact, they sold more S-Class in China than they'd ever sold anywhere else in the world. When you look at Porsche, one of the biggest German manufacturing names, we understand that they're about to launch, or at least getting set to launch, a new fully electric SUV that would be built here in Germany, in Leipzig, just down the road from where I'm speaking to you from in Berlin. And the idea for that SUV is to be put onto the US and Chinese market. Now, if it's going to be more expensive on the Chinese market, if there is going to be these tit-for-tat tariffs put in place, then that really kicks into the long grass the financial plans that they would have put in place for that model. So there are huge ramifications potentially for the profitability of the big German blue chip brands in a country that you've got to remember is scraping in and out of recession. According to the figures at the moment, it's either stagnation or it's recession. Then of course there's the environmental side of this. Electric vehicles and getting people into affordable electric vehicles, which is what Chinese companies were providing in Europe, or still try and provide in Europe. That's a huge part of Germany's goals of being climate neutral by 2045 and hitting ambitious targets by 2030. There is very few people involved in the auto industry in this country that are particularly happy with these tariffs that have been put in place by the European Commission.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. That is our correspondent, Peter Oliver, in Berlin.
Let's talk to another Peter, Peter Wells, the Director of Centre for Automotive Industry Research at Cardiff University. Peter, welcome back. Let's just pick up on this viewpoint from Germany, if you will, just for a moment. I mean, the suggestion from Germany that perhaps the biggest losers from the EU's crackdown might well be European brands that the EU is trying to protect.
Well, of course, this is, I think, a pretty accurate assessment, but you could argue that the biggest losers will, in fact, be European consumers, because they're going to be denied the opportunity to buy those vehicles at what would have been relatively reasonable prices, and it might even take some of the pressure off European manufacturers to bring in those low-cost EVs that they've been promising. So, yes, the industry, but also, yes, consumers.
Let's get this right. EU car makers that build electric vehicles in China and then import them back into Europe will now be hit potentially with a 21% additional duty tax. I wonder, can they absorb that if it goes ahead while maintaining profit margins?
It's very difficult for the companies to absorb the whole of that sort of tariff. I would say that it depends a bit on the vehicles and the segments, but already Tesla has announced that their Model 3 coming out of China will have price rises imposed very soon as a result of this tariff. Whether it's the full tariff price rise remains to be seen. It's likely to be split somewhere between consumers paying more and vehicle manufacturers earning less.
This comes, doesn't it, after the United States considerably increased tariffs on electric vehicles from China just a few weeks ago, last month, from 25% to 100%. Is this simply the story of the EU following the United States?
Well, the European Union as a whole and the manufacturers in it are in a somewhat different position. And in particular, the European manufacturers have been much more integrated with those coming from China. But bear in mind also that China isn't just strong in terms of finished vehicles. It's actually a really strong player in the battery segment. You know, most of the big independent producers are either Chinese or Korean, and China has a really strong position on those critical minerals that are needed to build those battery packs. So when you're looking at cobalt, lithium, magnesium, all those other materials needed for batteries, China and Chinese companies are major players in this. So the worry, I think, for Europe is not just that we engage in a tit-for-tat war over the finished vehicles, but that China uses its leverage on materials to really squeeze supply to European manufacturers and indeed to American. We could end up with a three-way international trade war, which will be good for nobody.
Just one final thought. China says it's going to toddle off to the World Trade Organization. I mean, is this the last word on this spat, or is there room for negotiation?
Oh, there's always room. I think what we'll see here is that now that the European Union have announced their position, we're going to see probably much tighter negotiation and discussions. As your reporter observed, nobody across Europe is really thrilled about this, some more so than others, but it does promise significant disruption for the industry here, and I think that lobby alone would want to see some sort of more sensible negotiated settlement, at least, to buy the European industry time, which is ultimately, I think, the purpose of this intervention.
Peter, good to see you. Thanks for coming back on the programme. Peter Wells, the Director of the Centre for Automotive Industry Research at Cardiff University.
In the United States, the Federal Reserve left interest rates unchanged. Now let's speak to our correspondent John Terrett in New York. John, the inflation rate now is about 3.3% in May and targets 2%. What did Jerome Powell have to say?
Well, I told you yesterday, I told you that I would be right, and I was. Me and the other 400 people on the trading floor did not expect a move yesterday in interest rates, and indeed it was unchanged. So the range is 5.25 to 5.50%, no change there. But in the news conference, as you correctly say, Zhonghua, there was some impactful words, because Jerome Powell said that progress is being made towards inflation, but not enough. He said it's not appropriate to cut interest rates at the moment until we have greater confidence in the trend and the direction. He did point out that 4 members of his committee want nothing to do whatsoever with any interest rate cuts in the whole of 2024, but they're not quite in the majority. The dot plot, which is the map that these people put out, the Fed puts out, suggests that there will be 1 interest rate cut before the end of this year, but not 3, which it suggested before, and they didn't rule out 2 either. So Citigroup, the giant bank, thinks that the cut will come in September, and that kind of makes sense because they'll meet in July next, no change then have a little holiday in August, and they come back in September, they make a rate cut, and then they've got 2 months to go until the election, so it doesn't look too politically sensitive, and then they can cut again in December if they wish to. Now, we also had CPI yesterday, which is the inflation paid by people in the stores and the gas stations and in the service sector as well. And as you know, it came in at its tamest for 2 or 3 years, getting on for 3 years. I've done some research this morning. Petrol prices are down, clothing prices are down, used cars, which Americans laughingly call lovingly pre-owned vehicles. We call them used cars. All right, John, got a new motor? Yes, I have. It's a lovingly pre-owned one. Thank you very much. They're coming down in price as well. So are airline tickets. This is all coming down. But the problem is when you go with mum on a Friday night to do the big shop of the week, or on a Saturday morning with dad to do the big shop of the week, unfortunately, there at the grocery store, prices are still up by about 22% compared to where they were before COVID, about 4 years ago. And in the 4 years running up to COVID, prices were only elevated by 7%. So you can see people are simply just not feeling it. Joe Biden said, look, the economy is strong, we're putting on jobs, wages are rising. And he's right. But the trouble is ordinary American voters simply just don't feel it. It's as simple as that. So you put that all together, and we have the Dow at the moment down by about 6 or 0.7%. The S&P 500 down by just over 0.1%. But the NASDAQ, these technology stocks are roaring away, and it's beginning to feel like 2021 and the dot-com collapse all over again. NASDAQ is up 1/5% at the moment. We also had PPI this morning, which is the younger cousin of CPI, and it was down a surprising 0.2%. And as a result of that, the 2-year and the 10-year yields are both down as well.
Yeah, John, Elon Musk has been threatening a walkout over a pay package worth $56 billion.
Yes, this is $56 billion that he earned in 2018. And sometimes it's a bit less than that. It's a bit difficult to keep track of. But overall, with all the options and all the things that these CEOs get, it was worth about $56 billion. Anyway, the problem is it was vacated by a judge in the state of Delaware. And that's because shareholders went to the law courts and said, look, $56 billion, come on, are you having a laugh? This is just too much money. And the judge agreed with them and vacated that pay packet. So Elon Musk is stalking around going, oh, you stole my money, you stole my, I want my money back, it's my money you stole. And now what's happened is this week there is a shareholder meeting for Tesla taking place. And Elon Musk released a statement this morning saying that basically all the shareholders have voted, what did he say, with a wide margin of support to reinstate that pay package. So the question is, why would they do that? Well, the answer is, why wouldn't they? Because Elon Musk is simply one of the most influential people of our era. I know he has his critics, but here is a man who is bringing internet to the entire planet right now by launching rockets into space and putting satellites up there. Here's a man starting an AI company, and it's all about AI now. The company's called xAI. Here's a man that's going to bring in a robo-taxi in August, has a robot called Optimus that is going to walk around like a human being, and already owns SpaceX, X, and Tesla. And for those reasons, the shareholders didn't want to lose him, and he was threatening to walk out. So that's why they appear to have voted in favor of reinstating that huge pay packet. Tesla shares up 4% now, but they're down 26% in the year to date.
John, shall I say it's happy ending between Disney and Ron DeSantis, and their feud started in 2022. It's been 2 years.
John, well, I'm sorry, the sound cut out. You're going to have to repeat that. I'm so sorry.
I was just saying that, shall I call it a happy ending between Disney and Ron DeSantis? Their feud started 2 years ago.
Yes.
Finally.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Ron DeSantis was running to be president of the United States. He was absolutely trounced by Donald Trump, as you know. But he is a very, very popular governor of the state of Florida. But Ron DeSantis, when he was running for president, decided to make wokeness an issue, and he targeted Disney, saying that Disney is too woke these days. Now, you have to make up your own minds about whether you think it is or not. But I'll tell you now, a lot of people in the Trump Republican Party think that it is. So the battlefield turned out to be an area called Reedy Creek, which is 121 kilometers around Disney World in Florida, which basically since the 60s Disney has been running. They've been in charge of all the services, fire, medical, roads, that sort of thing. And DeSantis took that away from them, using his powers as the governor. Disney did a midnight double take and got the powers back, and it was all heading to the courts, and it's not very good if you are the governor of Florida and you want your wife to be the next governor of Florida, by the way, which we believe he does. It's not very good to be rowing with your biggest public employer and your biggest name in the state. So now they've kissed and made up. They've had a nice little chipmunk party. I think Chip and Dale were there, Snow White was there, Mickey was there, Donald, all the big stars were there. And the deal is basically, I think that Disney doesn't get to run Reedy Creek anymore as it used to, but it's kind of very favorable, if you know what I mean. And the upshot is that Disney's going to plow $17 billion into updating just Disney World in Florida. And that is because these theme parks, even today, you know, this digital era, the parks make up 40% of the Disney business. It's very important to them.
Well, John, it's good to hear that they have made out. That is our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Greece swelters in its first extreme weather event of this summer, with temperatures reaching 43 degrees Celsius.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos and unicorn companies. Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
For China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello and welcome back to Global Business Europe. The conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza are dominating the agenda as leaders from the group of 7 major economies gather in Italy for their summit.
They say a deal has been agreed in principle to issue $50 billion of loans to Kyiv using interest from frozen Russian assets. President Volodymyr Zelensky is at this summit as a guest and is expected to sign a 10-year security agreement with President Joe Biden. Italy now takes over the G7 rotating presidency, and Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says there is much work to do.
We will, of course, talk about ongoing crises, starting with Ukraine and the Middle East. We will build on the work of the Japanese presidency, advancing on the need to create robust and controllable supply chains on what is probably the most complex challenge of our time, which is the advent of artificial intelligence, clearly with the need to seize its opportunities whilst governing its risks.
Let's talk to our correspondent Giles Gibson in Italy. Giles, clearly a huge amount on their agenda at this meeting. Tell us more about the G7's moves to support Ukraine.
Well, Jamie, some coordinated efforts from the G7 members in terms of supporting Ukraine, but also pushing back against what they see as Russian aggression. So just in the last hour or so, we've had the US and the UK and Canada announcing that they are accusing Russia of interfering in elections in Moldova. We've also had the US and Japan announcing that they're signing these security agreements with the Ukrainians. That press conference between the US President Joe Biden and the Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky expected roughly in the next hour or so. We also have the United Kingdom's government announcing some new cash for Ukraine, just over $300 million to help Ukraine to rebuild its devastated energy grid, of course, after constant Russian strikes over the course of the winter and the spring this year. And then that that apparent political deal for a $50 billion loan for Ukraine that will be backed up by frozen Russian assets in the West. And also, actually, the UK announcing some fresh sanctions in terms of what they see as a shadow fleet that is helping the Russians to evade existing G7 sanctions. So just a flurry of action in relation to Ukraine, as well as direct action on Russia.
Striding the international stage might be a welcome distraction for many of these leaders. This gathering comes at a rather tricky time for some of them, doesn't it? Many in a weak position back home.
Yeah, as the backdrop behind me might suggest, this is a very popular tourist destination for people from Italy as well as all over the world, and certain leaders will be feeling probably a little bit of respite as they leave their domestic political situations behind. You've got Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, who is way behind in the polls compared to the opposition Labour Party for their upcoming elections. The French President Emmanuel Macron, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, both reeling from some pretty poor European election results for their respective parties. You've got Joe Biden, the US President, who's locked in that really tight race with Donald Trump in terms of his hopes to stay on in the White House for a second term, and also these efforts to get the G7 countries to endorse or to re-endorse the proposed ceasefire deal for Gaza. And then on the flip side, you have Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister and the host, who's really in a much more solid position, or even a very strong position. She had a very strong performance for her party in the recent European elections, and now this is really the culmination of her country's G7 presidency, trying to get these leaders to agree to all sorts of pledges in that joint statement that will get around about in 24 hours' time.
Giles, thank you for that, and we're just watching live pictures there of Justin Trudeau from Canada. Our correspondent Giles Gibson in Italy.
The G7 summit is also being used to rally support for a ceasefire deal in Gaza. The White House says Israel remains supportive of its truce proposal back at the United Nations Security Council earlier this week. The US now hopes to intensify international pressure on Hamas to accept the deal. The group has demanded some changes, including an upfront agreement from Israel for a permanent ceasefire. Now let's talk to our correspondent Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. Jonathan, there is so much diplomacy of the potential agreement. Where does it stand?
According to Israeli officials, what Hamas, the answer given by Hamas is practically no. Hamas said that they have given a positive response, but asked for a few amendments. According to Israeli officials, the amendments they're asking is pretty much a negative response. They're asking to change the agreement altogether, and now there's plenty of pressure, especially on Qatar, to put pressure on Hamas, because again, there's a certain limit to how much the U.S. or the U.K. or any of the Western powers can put on Hamas. Hamas basically, if it would abide to anyone, it's to Qatar. Qatar is the political supporter for Hamas, financial supporter for Hamas, the home of the Hamas leadership, and therefore the diplomatic pressure is put from Western countries, mostly the United States, on Qatar to put on Hamas, at least for the moment, with no results, because we're seeing an agreement is nowhere near fruition at the moment.
Thanks, Jonathan. That is our correspondent, Jonathan Regev, in Tel Aviv.
Well, that's the picture from Israel. Our correspondent, Akram Al-Satari, is in Gaza.
Israeli occupation forces have been pushing further into Rafah. They announced an operation overnight that lasted between 6 p.m. last night and 6 a.m. today. During that operation, the sounds of the Apaches shooting at different areas of Rafah could be clearly heard even from Khan Yunis area. And over the day, they have been targeting different places in Rafah, in east and central and in West Rafah. But recently, there were some news about the Israeli troops redeploying in 3 main areas in Rafah, which is the area of Tel al-Sultan, the area of Al-Mashru' and Lijnina, 3 main neighborhoods in the eastern and central parts of Rafah. And it looks like now they are redeploying, rearranging, regrouping, reconsidering, replanning. Something is happening, and there were some statements and appeals made by the Palestinian Civil Defense asking people of Rafah or whoever might want to come back to their homes and to check whether their homes are still standing or whether their deeds are still alive, not to go to that area because it's very unsafe to go there. In the meantime, the most recent incident took the life of 2 people in Rafah when they were targeted by unmanned drone in some certain part of As-Salam neighborhood, and they were retrieved by the Palestinian Civil Defense. The Palestinian Civil Defense has been facing considerable pressures and their ability has been curtailed by the ongoing bombardment. They're not allowed to go inside Rafah. They're not allowed to collect the bodies of the people who are killed, and they have been confirming that very large number of people in Rafah are killed, and that some significant proportion of the bodies of the people who are killed is thrown in the street to decompose while they are not allowed to go and fetch it. So the situation is still featuring intensified bombardment with major redeployments in some areas of Rafah.
A fire is raging at an oil refinery in northern Iraq. It's thought the fire, which broke out on Wednesday, started in the refinery's liquid asphalt warehouse. No casualties have been reported, but local reports suggest a number of people were injured.
The United States Supreme Court has unanimously rejected a bid to restrict access to the abortion pill mifepristone. Justice has ruled that efforts by anti-abortion doctors and activists to roll back the drug's availability did not have legal standing. The decision is a major win for pro-choice activists and comes 2 years after the country's highest court removed the constitutional right to an abortion.
President Emmanuel Macron has suspended controversial voting reforms in France's Pacific territory of New Caledonia. That's after violent unrest left at least 8 people dead. Protests in New Caledonia started in May when Paris wanted to change voting rights for overseas-born residents. That was contested by the indigenous Kanak people, who feared more marginalisation if changes went through.
Britain's opposition Labour Party has unveiled its manifesto ahead of the July general election. Leader Keir Starmer told delegates the party's priority is wealth creation. His speech was interrupted by a climate protester who shouted Labour had stopped being the party of progress 5 years ago. The demonstrator was quickly removed from the event in Manchester.
Greece is seeing its first extreme weather event of this summer, with temperatures reaching 43 degrees Celsius in some areas.
Schools and historical sites will remain closed, at least during peak hours. The authorities have also warned against unnecessary travel. Our correspondent Evangelos Sipsas reports.
Standing on the highest hill in Athens, the more than 2,500-year-old Temple of Athena has shut its doors as the city experiences its first heat wave of the summer. Along with schools and public offices, the Parthenon will remain closed at least until Friday morning.
Today will be even more difficult, as according to the weather forecasters, we expect strong winds in some places, with extreme temperatures reaching up to 43 degrees. Greece is on alert. I call on our fellow citizens to show empathy and responsibility.
The Hellenic National Meteorological Service has warned that temperatures are expected to rise even above 40 degrees Celsius, climbing up to 44 across parts of the country. Authorities advise residents to protect themselves by staying out of direct sunlight, drinking plenty of water, and avoiding heavy physical work. In preparation, Athens has opened 10 air-conditioned spaces for vulnerable groups. However, away from urban areas, scientists warn that high temperatures and low humidity levels are perfect for wildfires.
We're dealing with a prolonged high temperature interval. This early heat with low humidity levels in forest areas creates ideal conditions for spreading wildfires, making it difficult for authorities to extinguish them, as we've seen happen in our country in previous years. The next 24 hours are very critical for the spread of wildfires.
Standing here at Syntagma Square in the heart of the Greek capital, the thermometer shows temperatures close to 40 degrees Celsius, making it difficult to even stand somewhere in the shade. Top that with Saharan dust from Africa, and you have conditions that it's making it even difficult to breathe, especially for those with existing health conditions. That's why authorities warn residents to stay away from sun exposure.
Well, there is a range of derangements that can happen after heat exposure. Simplest of all is heat cramps, having cramps during working, being a little bit dizzy, fainting, which is quite a little bit more serious. And the extreme of that would be heat exhaustion and then heat stroke.
Across the country, the heat is straining health services and power grids. Fire services remain on high alert. While there are no warnings of wildfires, the danger at such high temperatures is ever present. Evangelos Sipsas for CGTN, Athens.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN Storyboard's email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, a Norwegian mining company says it's discovered rare earth elements that could give a major boost to Europe's green transition.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. stay connected.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Li Juanhua. Our top stories. Ukraine's president joins G7 leaders at their summit in Italy as they agree to back a $50 billion loan for Kyiv using frozen Russian assets.
And China hits back at the EU's tariffs on electric vehicles and considers taking its case to the World Trade Organization.
New Zealand is to be added to China's list of visa-free countries, according to China's Premier Li Qiang.
Premier Li is on a tour of the Asia-Pacific, and his first stop was New Zealand's capital, Wellington, where he held talks with Prime Minister Christopher Luxon.
Our correspondent Owen Poland reports.
Welcome to New Zealand. Good to see you. Thank you.
After a brief greeting from New Zealand's Prime Minister, Premier Li received an official welcome that included a native Maori haka. There was also a more traditional guard of honour in the grounds of Wellington's Government House, before the two leaders held bilateral talks and also witnessed the signing of several new cooperation agreements that will increase New Zealand access to Chinese markets.
And China is also an important science and innovation partner, and we are collaborating on food science, the environment, and health and biomedical research.
Premier Li's visit marks the 10th anniversary of a comprehensive strategic partnership between the two countries, which China is keen to expand.
China supports free trade and building an open world economy.
The official visit comes at a time of rising geopolitical tensions in the Asia-Pacific region, but experts say that both countries want to have a productive and constructive relationship.
And as a mature relationship, there's also a willingness, I think, on both sides to face up to some of the differences and some of the issues that are in the relationship between the two countries. I think that's very healthy.
New Zealand's Prime Minister says the challenging global outlook makes it vital to share perspectives with China and engage on issues that are important to New Zealand, and he's confident that trade with China will continue to grow. At a joint media conference after the bilateral meeting, the Prime Minister said there were still huge opportunities to grow the relationship.
Our trade, our people, our education and our tourism linkages have benefited both our countries, supported economic growth and created jobs.
And experts say that the comprehensive strategic partnership has laid the foundation for future cooperation.
There's been some amazing successes from that agreement, so in particular trade, people-to-people links, cultural exchanges, and then there's been some other areas which have not been as successful and show that there's more work to be done.
That work will continue for the Premier when he moves on to New Zealand's largest city of Auckland, where the focus will be on promoting business and education. Owen Poland, CGTN, Wellington.
A Norwegian mining firm says it's discovered Europe's largest deposit of rare earth elements in what is the boost for the continent's transition to green technology. Rare Earths Norway says nearly 9 tons of rare earth metals have been discovered, eclipsing a major find in neighboring Sweden last year. The minerals are needed for key components of wind turbines, electric vehicles and other green technologies. The majority of global deposits are owned or controlled by China. Nitesh Shah is head of commodities and macroeconomic research at Wisdom Tree Europe.
This is a mega discovery. 8.8 million tons of rare earth oxides is huge. The next largest discovery really was in Sweden last year, but that was only of just over 1 million metric tons. So this is, at least 8 times bigger, and of that 8 million tons, at least 1 million tons of that is suitable for magnet-related rare earth technology. So this is, a huge find, and in the context of the European Union trying to develop its own value chain for developing energy transition technologies. So we're talking about the batteries, wind turbines, electric vehicles. This is really important because the EU has set about a new policy framework called the Critical Raw Materials Act, which requires 10% of the consumption of the materials to be sourced from the EU and the European Economic Area. And obviously, Norway being part of the EEA is going to feed into a huge amount of that final consumption.
So we're looking at a deposit of nearly 9 million metric tons of total rare earth oxides. So what does it mean for the global shift from fossil fuels?
The discovery of this this deposit allows for that transition to become more real. It's all nice having policy frameworks around how much should be shifted away from the burning of fossil fuels towards more renewable sources of energy, but the raw materials needed to make that transition need to be there. And quite importantly, and this will be the next step, is the ability to actually extract it and process it. And that's maybe one area where Europe is really lagging. More than 90% of the rare earth processing capabilities really sit in China. And if you look at the sort of the landscape as we see it today, the European Union is and the US is tightening the screws in terms of trade with China, in terms of the amounts of goods and services or the goods that it's importing in from China, especially around the energy transition. There have been significant carve-outs for the raw materials, including rare earth minerals, but having some discoveries and having the processing capabilities in-house in Europe will allow it to become a little bit more free away from China dependency.
And Rare Earths Norway says that it wouldn't start mining until 2030. And you know that 40% of the EU's total rare earth imports were from China in 2022. So do you think the EU is moving to reduce its reliance on China, and do you think that is easy?
So the discovery helps. It needs to expedite the mining capabilities and the processing capabilities. So in answer to your second question, no, it's not really moving fast enough. 2030 is only 5.5 years away, and to get to that sort of target level of 10% sourcing from there is going to take a Herculean effort. So, it's nice that these deposits are being found, but a lot more needs to be done to speed the process up.
China's Ant Group says it invested almost $3 billion in technology development in 2023, largely focused on artificial intelligence. The financial affiliates of the e-commerce giant Alibaba Group introduced several AI products on its Alipay platforms last year, including a smart healthcare manager and a smart financial manager, both developed using its own machine learning models.
Fast fashion retailer Shein has increased the prices by more than a third on some of its core products ahead of its planned IPO. In an effort to boost revenue and profit, the average price of a dress in the US has risen by 28%, passing price increases of rivals H&M and Zara. Shein taps a network of largely China-based suppliers, best known for its $5 tops and $10 dresses.
The British fintech company Revolut is moving its headquarters to Canary Wharf in London's financial district, taking a 10-year lease on 4 floors of office space. The company says it plans to display its logo like the other major banks do, as it waits to see if it will be granted a UK banking licence, enabling it to offer products like credit cards and personal loans.
The Airport Operators Association has criticised a last-minute rule change at the UK terminals. Airports were suddenly told to reinstate the 100ml limit on liquids in hand luggage last weekend. Airports have been required to install high-tech scanning equipment for up to 2 litres of liquids in hand luggage. Some had already complied, but the Department for Transport reverted to the old rules, stating improvements need to be made to the new system.
Police have used water cannon and tear gas to disperse protesters in Buenos Aires demonstrating against President Javier Milei's economic reform bill.
They fear it will worsen unemployment and prices as inflation sits at 300%. The Senate passed the bill by 37 to 36 votes is a key part of Milei's economic overhaul. Our correspondent Joel Riches reports from Buenos Aires.
Well, the protests have now died down, but the public debate over what happened both inside and outside Argentina's Congress yesterday very much continues. You mentioned the backlash there against this reform package pushed by Javier Milei's government. During the protests, which we saw throughout the day outside Congress, while senators debated this reform package and made a number of modifications and changes to their laws, but during those protests, police and security forces fired tear gas, pepper spray, as well as rubber bullets. And amongst the injured, there were even 5 opposition lawmakers. Members of the lower house of Congress were hospitalized, treated for burns, a result of the pepper spray used by the security forces. There were also a handful of arrests. The senators voted in the late evening, and after that vote, then there were reports of people taking to the streets across Buenos Aires and other cities in Argentina, banging pots in protest at this reform package. So clearly, large sectors of Argentine society are against this economic reform package proposed by Javier Milei, which they've now passed in the Senate. But that division, that divisiveness over this package was also seen in the Senate. You mentioned the final vote by senators, 37 to 36, so a very tight vote over this radical reform package. But nonetheless, it does give Javier Milei his first legislative victory in 6 months since taking over as president.
Yeah, Joe, very tight vote it was. What is Milei's aim with this economic reform bill? Now the inflation is around 300%.
Well, Milei's recipe to fix Argentina's economy is very simple. He wants to fully deregulate Argentina's economy. He wants to dismantle state intervention in the economy, and to do so he's pushed forward this reform package. It is a watered-down version. The first version of Milei's package, the omnibus bill, included over 600 laws. What was passed yesterday in the Senate has around 230, and the government has had to make many concessions to get this through the Senate. But nonetheless, the spirit of this legislation remains. There's going to be a series of privatization. There's a wholesale reform to labour in labour laws, as well as the fiscal package. And there's also a controversial tax scheme that looks to promote foreign investors. The markets look at this very positively, but there is the question of how this impacts Argentines, who, as you mentioned, are suffering this economic crisis with inflation still running at around 300% annually. And one opposition senator put it this way. He said he sees very little in this reform bill that favours mid-income Argentines, lower-income Argentines, but also it doesn't favour pensioners, nor does it favour small and medium-sized companies in Argentina. So the debate will continue. A final point, this bill now must return to the lower house to be rubber-stamped by the lower house in Congress for it to become legislation. But nonetheless, Javier Milei views this as a major triumph to continue with his plan to bring radical reform to Argentina's economy.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Fu Bao meets visitors in China for the first time since her move from South Korea.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The cleanup operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country. There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
And welcome back to Global Business Europe.
Euro 2024 kicks off in Munich on Friday when the host country Germany takes on Scotland.
Security has been beefed up across the country ahead of the tournament that runs till the 14th of July. Our correspondent Natalie Carney reports.
Germany is on high alert. With an estimated 2.7 million football fans expected in stadiums and a further 12 million at public viewing events across 10 German cities, the country has been investing tremendous time and money into security measures. Around 2,000 police officers are ready for the championship kickoff at Munich's Allianz Arena and throughout the city. For weeks, exercises, training sessions, and even simulated terrorist attacks have been taking place across the country.
We must be prepared for a warlike or other political conflicts, because something like this can quickly spill over into sport. We as the police are trying to prepare ourselves as best we can, and we are preparing for the 1%.
About 350 foreign police forces will also be deployed to Germany, largely from neighboring France, which is beefing up security ahead of the Olympic Games this summer. While the airspace above football stadiums will be closed, police have special jammers to force land any restricted drones. Temporary land, rail, and air border controls have also been stepped up and will remain in place until July 19th. While German authorities say that there are no concrete threats against any of the stadiums, the country is prepared for all contingencies.
Security concerns were heightened all across Germany following the recent arrest of a suspected Islamic State supporter in the German city of Cologne, who had reportedly applied unsuccessfully to work at Euro 2024 events. And a teenager was also recently detained by police in neighboring France, charged for planning to carry out an Islamic-inspired attack on the football events at the Olympic Games.
And in April, a media outlet said to be supportive of the Islamic State terror group published images of stadiums hosting Championship League quarter-final games. Germany's interior minister says terrorism is not the only threat.
Wir wappnen uns mit hohem Einsatz aller Sicherheitsbehörden.
We are arming ourselves against all conceivable dangers with a high level of commitment from all security authorities. Our focus ranges from the threat of terrorism to hooligans and other violent criminals to cyber security. The police will have a strong presence wherever large numbers of people are on the move. This will be a major effort.
Police in North Rhine-Westphalia, where 4 of the 10 venues are located, have taken on a central security coordinating role for the European Championship.
We can never guarantee 100% security. We can prepare ourselves as best we can, train people as best we can, send many people there, prepare technology as fast as we can. We can try, we can practice. Everything will be done.
Germany is pulling out all the stops to ensure safety and enjoyment for all of the beautiful game. Natalie Carney, CGTN, Munich.
Giant panda Fu Bao has met the public for the first time since moving to China.
In 2020, she became the first panda to be born in South Korea and moved to China in April to start her new life.
Our correspondent Wang Tianwei reports.
An apple in the morning can give energy for the day. That goes for Fu Bao, the young panda. A grand feast is one of the delights of her new home. The Dragon Boat Festival at the weekend was a time for a holiday snack specially adapted for pandas. And Fu Bao made short work of the leaf wrapping.
Apples are her favorite. Apples, radishes, fruits, vegetables, and bamboo shoots are her side dishes, while bamboo is her staple food. We make sure she gets balanced nutrition for a healthy diet.
To help Fu Bao adapt to her new environment, the center has placed her in the breeding garden where she can socialize with her neighbors through communication windows.
During the adaptation period, our focus is on helping the panda adjust to our living environment, facilities and climate. She also needs to get used to the local food and our breeding methods. And she must become familiar with our caretaking team to integrate into her new home and reduce stress.
Keeper Xu Xiang keeps a special diary of Fu Bao's growth in China. Her daily routine includes morning walks for exercise, socializing with other pandas, enjoying bamboo feast, and taking afternoon naps before more meals and leisure time with her caretaker.
Gently patting her nose, lightly touching her with the tip of my hand, and scratching her back helps build a close relationship with Fu Bao. I hope she continues to thrive and brings joy to everyone she meets.
Fu Bao is also neighbor to other well-known pandas like Xiao Qiji from the United States and Yi Yi and Sheng Yi from Malaysia at the Shenshuping Giant Panda Base. The base spans 150 hectares at an altitude of 1,700 meters. It offers an ideal natural environment with mountains and a mild, humid climate, making it a perfect home for over 70 pandas. Wang Tianhui, CGTN.
And finally, endangered wild horses have returned to the Golden Steppe region of Kazakhstan for the first time in 200 years.
Prague Zoo says 7 Przewalski horses were airlifted to the region earlier in the month and are already settling in well.
Zoo officials have described it as a conservation miracle after the species went almost extinct in the wild 50 years ago.
The headlines again. China hits back as EU's tariffs on electric vehicles and considers taking its case to the World Trade Organization.
Our other headlines, these are live pictures. You're seeing the G7 leaders there joining, by the way, Ukraine's president at their summit taking place in Italy right now as they agree to back a $50 billion loan for Kyiv using frozen Russian assets.
And police in Buenos Aires used water cannon and tear gas to disperse demonstrations against President Milei's economic reform bill.
And that is it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
On all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN Africa Live. See you again tomorrow, same time, same place. Now from all the team in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.